My name is Khadijih Bagum. Always on such holy days, the friends ask me to tell about my brief but glorious years with my husband, the Bab. Known to me as Ali Muhammad, he and I had been childhood playmates. While still in his teen years, the Blessed Bab had engaged in commerce with his uncle, and he had assumed complete management of their trading house in Bushehr. As a teenager, I once had a dream of him standing in a field of flowers, praying, wrapped in a robe embroidered in golden thread with the verses from the Quran. When I told my mother the dream, she said it was probably due to the fact that Ali Muhammad was so devoted to his prayers. Another night, I dreamt of Fatima. I dreamt that the Prophet Muhammad's daughter had come to our house and asked if I or one of my sisters would marry her son, the Imam Hussein. We stepped forward with joy and delight to welcome her, and Fatima arose and kissed me on the forehead. In my dream, I understood that this meant she had selected me. I awoke the next morning feeling exhilarated, yet modesty forbade me telling my dream to anyone. But that very day at noon, the Bab's mother and grandmother both came to call upon us. My sisters and I went to greet them in the same way that we had done in my dream. The Bab's mother arose and kissed me on the forehead, just as in my dream. So when we girls were dismissed, I eavesdropped and listened as the Bab's mother requested that a marriage be arranged between her son and myself. Immediately, I felt a great stirring within my heart. It seemed as if I were being flooded with God's mercy and grace. I was thrilled at the prospect of this marriage. When my mother told me of the proposal, I blurted out my dream. She became very excited. "Surely this augurs some good fortune," she said. Our wedding took place in August of 1842. I then moved into the house of the Bab. We lived with his mother and their two servants, Mubarak and Fide, an Ethiopian couple. No words can ever convey my blissful feelings of good fortune in those early days. But then, one night, not long after our marriage, I had another dream, a terrifying nightmare. A ferocious lion was standing in the courtyard of our house. My arms were wrapped around its neck. It was dragging me along, and I was clinging desperately to its mane. The beast dragged me once, then twice around the perimeter of our courtyard. Still, I clung to its neck. The beast made a third circle of the courtyard, and we were halfway around when suddenly I awoke with a start. Trembling and terrified, the Bab immediately reached out to comfort me. I told him of my nightmare, and he soothed me, saying that I had awakened too soon, before the good tidings. "Your dream," he whispered, "portends that our life together will not last more than 2.5 years. A new bride expects to hear about beginnings, not endings. However, my beloved husband's affection calmed my troubled heart, and soon the dire forebodings were offset by the joyous news that I was with child. I was to have a baby, but my joy was brief. I soon became deathly ill. Both my life and that of my child-to-be were endangered. It came time for delivery, and I was on the threshold of death. My mother-in-law was frantic. She pleaded with her blessed son to intervene. The Bab then took up a mirror and wrote a prayer upon it. he told his mother to hold the mirror in front of my face. I stared into the glass. I stared through the prayer into the mirror, placing all my faith in the holy words. And before I knew it, I had delivered my child. It was a boy, a beautiful boy. We named him Ahmad. We were young, we were in love, and now we were parents of a new baby. However, earthly joy was not to be ours. Shortly after his birth, Ahmad passed away. All of us in the house were deeply grieved and despondent.
The Bab consecrated Ahmad's passing with these words: O my God, my only desire, grant that the sacrifice of my son, my only son, may be acceptable unto thee. Grant that it be a prelude to the sacrifice of my own, my entire self, in the path of thy good pleasure. Endue with thy grace my lifeblood, which I yearn to shed in thy path. Cause it to water and nourish the seed of thy faith. Endow it with thy celestial potency, that this infant seed of God may soon germinate in the hearts of men, that it may thrive and prosper, that it may grow to become a mighty tree, beneath the shadow of which all the peoples and kindreds of the earth may gather.
One day in the following spring, in the late afternoon, my husband came home earlier than usual. He told me that he had a particular task that he had to tend to that evening, and would I have our servant Fide prepare dinner earlier than was the custom. Fide was happy to comply, and so we took our evening meal earlier that night in the room of my mother-in-law. My husband then retired for the night, and soon I also went to bed. But about an hour later, while everyone was sleeping and the house completely quiet, my husband rose from the bed and left our room. At first, I took no particular notice of his absence, but when it lengthened to more than an hour, I grew concerned. I went to look for him, but nowhere in the house could I find him. I thought perhaps for some reason he had gone out, but when I checked the main door, I found it locked on the inside. I then walked into the courtyard to the western side of the house and looked up at the rooftop. To my surprise, I saw a light burning in the upper chamber. I was particularly surprised because I had never known my husband to go to that part of the house at that hour of the night unless he had guests. And yet, he always informed me when a visitor was expected, and he had not done so that night. Both surprised and concerned, I crossed the courtyard and climbed the stairs. When I reached the top of the steps, I saw my husband within the upper chamber, his hands upraised, chanting a prayer, supplicating heaven, tears streaming down his face. But his features were luminous, rays of light radiated from his face. He looked so majestic, so powerful. That fear seized my limbs, rooting me to the spot. I began to tremble uncontrollably. I found I could neither enter the room nor retrace my steps. My willpower abandoned me. Powerless, I was on the verge of screaming when he made a gesture with his blessed hands, motioning me to go back. Somehow the movement of his hands returned my courage to me, and I was able to descend the stairs and return to our room and to bed. But all that night I lay awake, deeply troubled and disturbed. In my few fitful moments of sleep, that scene in the upper chamber would flash through my mind, adding to my anxiety. My head throbbed with questions. What terrible event had taken place to have caused my husband such sorrow and tears, to have resulted in such fervent prayers and intense supplications? Sleep was impossible to me that night. At last the dawn broke with blessed relief, the sound of the muazzin drifting over the rooftops. A little after sunrise, Fida took the samovar and tea glasses to my mother-in-law's room, where we usually partook of our breakfast. My husband had preceded me there. When I entered the room and my eyes fell on him, the majesty and power of the night before again took shape before me. Once again, I began shuddering uncontrollably. My mother-in-law had at that moment just exited the room. As the Bab was quietly drinking his tea, he looked up at me. With a gentle smile, he affectionately bade me be seated. Then he offered me his own glass of tea. I drank what tea remained and found my courage restored. He then asked what was troubling me. I spoke up boldly. I was too disconcerted by the change in him to stand on ceremony. "You are no longer the same person I knew in my childhood," I blurted out. "We have grown up together. We have been married for 2 years, living in the same house. I thought I knew you, but now I see a different person before me. You have been transformed." I went on to say that this change troubled me, frightened me. With a loving smile, he said that although he had not wished to be seen by me in the condition of the previous night, God had ordained otherwise. It was the will of God, he said, that you should have seen me in the way you did last night, so that no shadow of a doubt should ever cross your mind, that you should know now with absolute certainty that I am the manifestation of God, whose advent has been expected for 1,000 years. It was as if a thunderbolt had struck me. Somehow I knew that this was the truth. I fell at his feet, prostrating myself on the floor. Immediately my beating heart became calm. I believed my husband completely. Ali Muhammad, my beloved husband, was the Bab, and I vowed to serve him faithfully for the rest of my life. A few weeks later, on the evening May 22nd, 1844, the Bab said to me, "Tonight we will entertain a dear guest." His entire being was ablaze as he spoke. I was most eager to hear what he had to say and who this guest might be. But he turned to me and said, "It is better if you go and sleep." I did not wish to disobey him, but when I retired to our room, I remained awake all night. Until morning, I could hear his blessed voice, conversing with his guest, Mullah Hussein, the Bab el Bab, the gate of the gate.